Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Love Procurement Podcast. My name is Kelly Barner, and I'll be your host for today's conversation. Now, I'm glad to welcome back two previous guests. We've got with us Vishal Patel, Vice President of Product Marketing at Ivalua, and my good friend Philip Ideson, Founder and Managing Director of Art of Procurement. So hi, Phil, and hi, Vishal.
Hey, Kelly. How's everything?
Everything's going great.
Hey, Kelly. Hey, Vishal. I'm looking forward to this. Thanks for inviting me back on.
Thank you.
And so I'm glad to hear that you're looking forward to this, Phil, because this is a very different conversation than we typically have. We've decided to push ourselves out of the comfort zone of talking about very traditional, responsible procurement things. And we're actually on a task to have a little bit of fun today. So I'm going to be challenging you both on some things that we wouldn't typically get into in these interviews, starting with your background. So, Phil, I'm going to start with you here. Mm-hmm. If you did not work in procurement, what corporate function do you think you would be a part of?
Well, I think maybe I'm not sure if my desires for where I would work and my abilities would necessarily match with each other.
Let's assume they do.
Honestly, I think that I would probably have pursued a career in sports and sports management, from a business side of things. So I still am, as a lot of people know, very interested in football or soccer, as I guess I have to call it as well sometimes. And so from a very early age, from an internship perspective, I pursued an internship actually here in the States with Columbus Crew. And that was just something that I was very interested in going and doing. But then, buying light bulbs for Ford vehicles came in between that. And, I went on my procurement path. But that's probably something I would have really enjoyed to pursue.
Now, Vishal, I'm actually going to make this harder for you. So you have sort of a double you can't work in. Let's assume you didn't work in the field of procurement, but you also can't be in marketing. What corporate function would you be a part of?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. Corporate function, I feel like I would probably not be in a corporate function. I feel like I would have gone more of the entrepreneurial route and started my own business and I was very close to doing that. So that's probably why I'm saying that. But where I thought your question was going to go is, what would you do if you weren't just working in non-corporate related? But there, my answer would have been, I think I would have maybe gone the route of a chef. And
would you really?
So, yeah.
Okay, so I have to be totally honest. This was one of the questions I was prepared to answer. My answer would also be working in a restaurant. I would not want to be in charge, but I love to chop. So does that make you a sous chef? Whatever role in a big kitchen that makes you. I don't want to have to make anybody happy with the recipes or manage seasoning or anything like that. But I would be very happy chopping like vegetables and herbs and things all day long. So maybe if this doesn't work out, Vishal, you and I could open a restaurant.
Yeah, and a lot of chef responsibility. I tied it, I was thinking about it, and you have to source really good ingredients, high quality stuff. So it comes back to what you buy.
Now, what kind of cuisine?
Oh, I hadn't got that far. But I'm like a mix of I'm a weird mix of background. So I'm Indian, African. Mm-hmm. Because I'm Indian, but I was born and raised in Kenya. So there's a interesting blend of cuisines there. So probably something around there.
It definitely reinforces my desire not to be in charge of the spices. Very specific, strong spices. When I think of both of those cuisines, wonderful spices, but ones where it's not like you can put a little bit too much in and the dish is still okay. Yeah. Ones where like you put a little bit too much in and Nobody's eat okay. It because they're very intense spices. All right, Phil, if we were going to hire you in our restaurant, where would we put you to work?
Other dishes, maybe.
I feel like you might be a good barman, though.
If there was a role to, that you need microwaves, I could kind of do the microwaving, maybe.
Pushing the buttons 30 seconds at a time.
But that's pretty much where my capabilities would end, I think.
So we're going to kind of roll on the spirit of things. And one of the areas where procurement gets a really hard time, although I definitely don't think we're alone in this, is in some of the buzzwords and terminology that we use, some of the acronyms that we use that in some cases create truthfully community for us because we're speaking the same language, but at the same time can also put a barrier between us and our colleagues in other functions if they're not speaking the same language. So being sarcastic, the most endearing parts of procurement communication do tend to come back to some of these ideas where maybe we don't all think the same thing. So, in the spirit of doing a little bit of procurement, but also a little bit of marketing at the same time, we're going to talk about the idea of brand personality and voice. Now, Phil will know I've been on a learning journey to attempt to understand what marketing really is and what it really means. And it seems like this brand identity, brand personality, brand voice is really important. So, Phil, what would you say is Art of Procurement's personality? And maybe even what does that idea of a brand identity or personality mean to you?
So, I'm under pressure here because Vishal's the real marketer amongst us. And so, he may have a different opinion. When I think about brand, I think it's what do people say about you when you're not in the room with them? What do they say about your company? What do they say about, who you are as individuals and things like that? And that's kind of where brand comes from for me. So from a brand personality perspective, you want to, as much as you can impart kind of personal characteristics in a company brand, if you will. And so I think about for us, when we think about it from an art of procurement perspective, it's, being trustworthy. It's about being, being knowledgeable, experienced, being empathetic, being about, caring and bringing community together and things like that. Those are the things that I think about when I think, what would I love people to talk about AOP, when they talk behind our backs. So that's really how I think about it.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Oh, go ahead, Vishal.
Well, I was just going to say the way I think about brand and, sort of company personality is similar, right? Like, so there's all the stuff you do in marketing, which are the taglines, the words, the copy, right? That's well and good. But outside of that, what kind of emotional connection do you have with the people that are on the other side of that? And as you say, what do they say when you're not in the room? Or how do they feel about your company? I know feeling is not the right marketing word, but really it kind of is, what's the perception that you give people?
Well, and I think increasingly as marketing content takes to channels like audio, right, takes to channels like video, I actually think the term feeling is very appropriate. It's been interesting for me. It's been a long time now, but in the earliest days of starting to work on Art of Procurement content, I was spoiled because I had a literal voice to start with. And so anything that I was doing from a copy perspective it already had sort of a sound behind it, a way of expressing things. And I definitely feel like that helped. Now, Vishal, sort of doubling down on this question around personality and brand, I think the fact that you guys knew from the outset that love procurement would be the theme to this podcast tells us a little something about it. It's not like the procurement is good for you, so you'd better do it podcast, or procurement says don't, so stay away from it podcast, right? There's always been this air of informality and fun, but joy about the field. How would you describe maybe your vision? Certainly we go back to the t-shirt. Love Procurement has existed long before the podcast as an idea at Ivalua. So that love procurement idea and how that connects to the overall brand voice and personality at Ivalua.
Yeah, for sure. So outside of love procurement, I would say Ivalua's brand is one of being sort of a reliable partner, right? So like a friend, a long-term friend that you've had that's very reliable and you can always kind of count on, is the way I would describe it. I think we do, as being a technology provider, right? Like we think of ourselves and our customers think of us as being innovative, but not innovative at like all costs, right? Like we're kind of practical innovators, I guess. So we like to get into the weeds of things and solve problems, right? So that's kind of the Ivalua brand. Trust is a big part of it, and long-term partnership, right? So the metric that most Ivaluans will know and will have a part in is our customer retention rate, and that's been between 95 and 99% for over 20 years. So what that tells you is like that customer success, customer care is a big part of it. But also we're also not the traditional software company as well. You think of software companies, it's like, well, you're gonna be pretty flashy and you're gonna pursue like aggressive growth at all costs, and you're gonna even the way we're built, right? Like the technology architecture is not the same as everybody else. So we definitely like to do things different. But we are still, we like to be a reliable friend.
Yeah, if I can jump in as well. So kind of when I think about love procurement, what that means to me is that, you're kind of in it together. And this is something that, we definitely try and instill as well. At the end of the day, we're a community, and if we all help each other succeed in the community gets stronger. The community being procurement gets stronger. That creates opportunities for everybody. And so that's what I've always taken from the hashtag love procurement.
Yeah, and just going back to that, so the reason for doing that was pretty simply that I don't know, I kind of realized that people, whenever you're talking to people in procurement, like there's this portrayal of like them really enjoying what they do, right? The way they speak about it, the way they envision the function to be, the sort of goals and objectives they have. People really enjoy what they're doing whenever I talk to customers or even non-customers. And so this was really meant to be a way, I think, for people to just kind of say that, right? And talk about it in that way. Like, hey, yes, we're in procurement and we actually like it. Not like hiding behind, like, oh, we're in procurement, sorry, kind of thing. So I think, over the last 20 years, it's grown into quite an important function, right? So I think it was partly to kind of bring that out and have people talk about it kind of in the open.
Now, anybody that's joining us for the video version of this conversation is probably going to know why I'm asking. But follow-up question for you, Vishal. Is the little blue shape under the letter A in Ivalua a smiley face?
That is a good question. I don't think it was intended to be anything really apart from like just a little design accent. But yes, let's call it a smiley face.
There you go. Okay, we're going with that, at least for this conversation. You're talking about being sort of like a friend you can trust. I'm thinking, that never occurred to me. I think that's a smiley face in the Ivalua logo.
It was all on purpose.
Yeah. So, some of what procurement talks about is specific to us, but also consulting, where we've all spent some time, is sort of has a bad reputation for using buzzwords. So I'm going to give you guys a couple of sort of quick fire opportunities to make choices. And I'm not going to do it even for video or audio. Just assume there's a lot of sort of air quotes and sarcasm implied in the options of these terms. Starting with you, Vishal, around the current tone of what's going on in procurement today, would you describe the current prevailing winds as disruptive or agile?
That's an interesting one. Disruption for me, or disruptive, sounds like, I know a lot of tech startups like to use that term, like we're disrupting everything and everything's going to change. But disruptive to me also, it sounds a little bit more chaotic, like you're going into a shop and kind of breaking stuff and knocking over shelves, and it maybe is like you're actually stumbling into something versus sort of purposefully, walking in or running in a direction. So I prefer agile in the way that, what's happening today, right? Like in the market, in technology, in procurement function, I like to think about it as more like agility and that agility applies to you being receptive to new technology or change, or right? Disruptive technology. And there is some of that, but I think it gets thrown around quite a lot. Like if everything is disruptive, then
true.
It seems like everything might be broken.
Yeah, which does not sound great because
No.
we've had quite enough of that. Now, if we take that same idea and apply it at the organizational level, would you rather hear Ivalua described as an innovator or a game changer, to give you another pairing of buzzwords?
Yeah, I'd go with innovator there, just because just coming from the history of a company like Ivalua, right? Like 20 years in a field. One is, I think you have to continue innovating in order to be, considered a sort of leading provider in the space, right? So it implies continuous improvement, I think, with the technologies you have. It implies bringing fresh ideas to the table. Game changer, I think, is great, right? But again, just like disruptive, everything can't be a game changer.
Yeah.
I don't think. You can have certain things be game changers, but again, if everything's a game changer, then nothing's a game changer, I guess.
Nothing is.
So, yeah.
Absolutely
that's my
true. All right, Phil, it's your turn.
Okay.
Thinking about Art of Procurement, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're still in full-on entrepreneurial, fast growth mode, right? So when we think about the buzzwords somebody might use to describe where we are, would you rather growth hack the space or future-proof the business?
So for me, when I think of growth hacking, I think that sounds like you kind of taking shortcuts and maybe you're cheating a little bit, or, what you do isn't necessarily set for the long term. I think that, I'm probably a lot more conservative. And so always think about, you want, whatever you build, you want to have strong foundations upon it. And, does that mean that you may grow a little bit slower? You may not be as, have as much hyperbole out there about what you do because you're not just trying to get kind of the next quick hit.
Yeah.
So for me, that's how I think about the business. Definitely future-proof rather than a growth hacker.
Now, when it comes to how you're seen and sort of the reputation you have as the face and the voice of Art of Procurement, first of all, I acknowledge you're going to hate this question. So it's part of why I'm taking the opportunity to ask it. You're here with Vishal, so you have to play nice and answer the question. We do get really positive feedback about you all the time. If you had to take one of these, would you rather be labeled a guru or a thought leader?
Yeah, can I pick neither?
No, you can't. That is not the rules of my game.
I'm thinking of just, I don't take feedback well, so I'm thinking of just slinking off anyway into the background here. I guess a thought leader if I had to, but so at the end of the day, I'm a big believer in, it's not for you to say, it's for other people to decide. What I try and set out to be is maybe more of a catalyst, how to help people think about doing things differently or driving change or just, taking a different perspective. But to be honest, I'm probably uncomfortable with any label that's thrown at me, except for, football supporter. That will do me.
Well, going back to your sports interest,
right.
I think procurement coach might be a good.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, there you go. We'll get you a whistle.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go and buy the website and trademark that before this goes out live.
Hashtag procurement coach. That's it.
Now, you've both been such good sports with all of the buzzwords. I'm actually going to give each of you the opportunity to vote something off the island. So we're going to go a little bit survivor themed here. So I have a few groupings of buzzwords, and I'm going to give you each a choice. You get to pick one and vote one off. So Vishal, let's do you first. I'm going to give you 3 buzzwords. You can get rid of one, but you have to tell us why. So your options are action planning, boil the ocean, or circle back. If you were going to get rid of one of those, nobody can ever say it again. Not at Ivalua, not at Art of Procurement, not anywhere. Which one goes and why?
So I might add one. Is that part of the rules? Can I add one?
I'll take it. I'll take it. Phil doesn't have a whistle yet, so.
I'm going to add dovetail.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. And I can vote off 2 out of the 4?
I'll give it to you as long as you explain why. You can pick another one.
All right. So I'll vote off boil the ocean. and I'll tell you why. And then I'll definitely vote off dovetail.
Okay, what's
So
the backstory there?
So wait, so boil the ocean. I think I just don't. I don't know. It's maybe more of a personal thing, but it's like one of those phrases that is thrown around a little bit. It sounds like you're trying to say something is overwhelming and is going to create a lot of issues and challenges, but it's super generic. And boiling the ocean doesn't sound like a good thing anyway. So even though it may actually be happening, it's probably not. We don't need to focus on that, or maybe we do, but in another way. So that's boil the ocean, and then dovetail. I just it was a term that I had heard like early on, like when after business school, I think, and it was like thrown in all the time. And I guess it's supposed to mean like you go into something in a small way and then kind of expand from there, like a dovetail. But
yeah,
I don't know. It just never stuck with me and sounded a little strange to me.
Well, everybody's on notice. Those two words, phrases are now officially off limits. Phil, it's your turn. So I'm giving you 4. And by Vishal's new rules, you can either get rid of 1 or you can get rid of 2, but you've got to tell us why.
Okay.
So your choices are put a pin in it, burning platform, drill down, or critical path.
So probably the one that I use the most probably needs to be voted off the island, because I wish that I would come up with something, a different term, and that's burning platform. I'm always using burning platform, whether it's in writing, whether it's in just chatting. And, I know that in some areas might not be culturally appropriate just because of things that have happened. I certainly get reminded of that all the time on our team. And so, and then I remember by the time it's too late and I've said it again. So I need to come up with some new vocabulary, I think, for burning platform. The others, honestly, I've never really used, and I don't have a strong reaction to. But burning platform would be the one for my own benefit that I need to vote off the island.
Well, it's part of that whole being a catalyst thing, right? So if we're not careful, next thing you know, like everything's on fire. We've got catalysts, we've got burning platforms. I think for me, if I had to get rid of a term, and this would hurt me more than anybody else, is bandwidth. Bandwidth is like my go-to when I'm trying to find a polite way to say, I am too busy to do that for you right now. We simply don't have the bandwidth. And somehow like that just sounds better than I'm too busy to do that thing for you right now. So we'll take all of those off. None of those terms can be used anymore.
I feel like we could create some new ones, maybe.
We could invent some new ones.
Potentially a different podcast on new buzzwords.
That's true. And procurement's actually pretty darn good. So we come up with these terms and things evolve over time. They end up having different meanings. Somebody comes up with like a slightly better spin on something. So just to dig into a couple of these, Vishal, in your opinion, what's the difference, or is there a difference between digital transformation and procurement transformation?
Yeah, good question. I do think there's a difference. For me, digital transformation is definitely more related to the technology, right? So it's like going from the dial-up phone to the smartphone, and then obviously there's things that are impacted by that. Yeah. But procurement transformation is more about the function, changing the procurement's role and goals and objectives and value within an organization, right? Like, so it's more about that, which also includes technology, but isn't like only focused on technology. Whereas it's kind of the other way around with digital transformation. So they're definitely related, though.
Yeah. I feel like I missed the boat on procurement transformation because I'm pretty sure I was doing it at MTORUS before anybody thought of that snazzy term. We called it program design, which sounds very responsible, but not nearly as snazzy and exciting as procurement transformation. So I feel like I sort of missed out there. One more pairing for you, Vishal. This is like really getting into terms du jour. Intake and orchestration.
Oh yeah, this is an active scenario, right? Sort of playing out in the market right now. So for me, it certainly makes sense, right? Like as a term, as a category. I wouldn't say it's entirely new necessarily. It's maybe the next evolution of what has been happening in procurement, right? So you've always had a purchase requisition, which, maybe what intake has intake is the evolution of a purchase requisition or similar, right? Like you've always had people saying, hey, I need to do this sourcing, or hey, I need this contract. And that was maybe done offline, and now it's into become more of a tool, a digital process.
Yeah.
Where I think there's complications or confusion in the market is like there's intake management, there's intake orchestration, there's procurement orchestration, there's process orchestration, so it's all like being sort of jumbled up in the market. I think of it all as intake management, and management does include sort of how you orchestrate the execution of the intake, right? So that's kind of my view on it. I think that the terms can be confusing though, for sure.
Yeah.
Talking of intake, just jumping in, I remember the very early days of building your own Microsoft Access databases as being and a form that sits in front of an Access database as being the intake form. So we've certainly come a long way from those days, but that was the advanced intake, I think, when I started in procurement.
Yeah. I mean, you guys are looking at it maybe from a more broader standpoint, but what's sort of your perspective on that particular category?
I think from my perspective, I think that intake can be something on its own, but also a part of orchestration. So somebody can, look and just be focused on the intake process, and the intake, is then can include, I want this, directing it in the right place, but it doesn't have to include orchestration. But typically orchestration itself would include intake, if you know what I mean. So I think I can see why there can be both, but I can also see why that drives confusion.
Right. I guess orchestration, it seemed like that came up as a need because organizations had different systems that weren't kind of connected together. And then when you add the intake on it, it's like, well, what do I do with that intake? And so that, now you need orchestration because everything's sort of disconnected. But yeah, it's an interesting space for sure.
Kelly, what do you think of that?
So I'm actually going to complicate things further by adding the term automation, because of course, all of this is becoming a big topic of discussion and a new area of technology investment at the same time as we've got process automation, we've got AI, we've got chatbots, we've got, machine learning has been around, but all of the different ways that these things are not only being folded into our tools, but entered into our conversation. And I don't know, maybe this goes back to some of the conversations I've had about procurement transformation, where people are like, yeah, we're completely on board. And then they go back to their desk and it's like, so what does that mean I'm supposed to do differently? Like, I don't know what this means from a step standpoint or a priority standpoint. Things like whether it's intake or orchestration or automation, which is admittedly more general, what exactly do we mean we're going to do? What does that mean is going to change in terms of a priority or even a business outcome, right? Making sure everybody is totally clear on those things is the only thing that's going to give us ROI, frankly, in any area that we try to drive improvements in.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're moving on now to the last section. And this is the part that I know drives non-procurement professionals crazy about talking to us. And it's our acronyms, TLAs. If we want to stick to 3-letter ones and be really specific, we can get another acronym in there. So Phil, first question goes to you. How would you define the difference between CSR and ESG? So corporate social responsibility and environmental, social, and governance related programs.
Yeah. So, when I think about CSR, I think really that being the E in ESG mostly. I think when we thought about CSR, we really thought about environmental and sustainability. Now, you could deep dive into that further and, unpack it, and it includes more than that. But that's what always comes to my mind is the ESG is when we're thinking about environmental, social diversity, modern slavery, obviously the governance that comes around it. But CSR, in my mind, was always more specifically for the environment.
Yeah. And actually, sticking with the theme of E, Vishal, that dovetails nicely into your next question. Do you think we still need to use the E, the little lowercase e, when we talk about e-sourcing, e-procurement, e-auctions, any of those little things? Like for a while, it was trendy to put a lowercase I before anything. It didn't even have to be an Apple product. You could just stick an I in front and it was trendy and had white earbuds. Do we need the little lowercase e before everything we do?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I don't think we do. I don't think any of those happen today without, or without a tool, right? So I think the implication is that it's involving some technology, but there are probably situations where it's not the case. I'd vote for getting rid of the E, actually, but it becomes kind of weird with e-procurement. Or e-purchasing, because then it's just the function. So, yeah.
Because so many times people in procurement aren't buying, right? So you've got procurement, sourcing, buying, contracting, but we have these titles that we use, but we don't necessarily do the activity that goes with the title, which certainly confuses things.
Yeah, I've also heard some procurement functions kind of just referring to everything they do as sourcing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's including contract, supplier management, contract management, purchasing activity. Everything is referred to as sourcing, which is a different angle. I guess that's where it starts. But I'd vote for getting rid of the E.
Interesting. So we've got the E going. Now, as we start to wrap up this conversation, we've focused on all of this in sort of a joking way, but really the idea is our language standing in the way of us achieving the things that we need to do, either within procurement or as we talk to suppliers, as we talk to other people in the company? I want to give each of you an opportunity to offer up a piece of advice. So you think about, we're trying to say all of these complicated things. We're obviously trying to sound smart and informed while we're saying them. How can we make sure that we never prioritize, let's say, clarity, or we never prioritize sounding buzzy or trendy over clarity and making sure with connecting with other people? Phil, I'll go to you first. What sort of general communications advice would you offer to people?
Yeah, and maybe it's cliche, but it's, I just always think about mirroring the language that is used by your stakeholder or by those within your business rather than the procurement language. Now, how are they talking about things? Because I remember back in my practitioner days, they may say things in one way and I would still respond to them in procurement speak. And so, that drives some of the confusion. Even if you're trying to correct them and say, no, sourcing doesn't mean category management. Well, let's talk about actually what those things are as opposed to just using general terms. So I think that's important. Another area where I always saw this was in savings and savings methodologies. We'd always be using super procurement speak and telling people how we're going to save them, calculate the money that we saved for them. Again, how can we put that back into the language or the context that's better understood by the business? So it might not even be in dollars and cents, but it can be in, jobs saved or, additional sales equivalent or whatever it might be. And just having a sanity check, try and sanity check the way, and whether that's you, whether that's a colleague or a peer, when you're putting together presentations to say, is this fit for external kind of consumption outside of procurement, or are we just confusing people further?
Yeah. And Vishal, along the same lines, you're having conversations with people all the time, whether it's through podcasts like this, whether it's at your live events where you're face-to-face in both formal on stage and also casual sort of networking type settings. What do you pick up about the language that's being used, or how do you go through making your own choices about how to discuss the different things that procurement either has available to them as resources or the forms of business impact they're trying to drive?
Yeah, definitely. reiterate what Phil just said is that so keeping things simple, I think, is really important. Even in marketing, we tend to overdo the marketing. So one of the things I always try to do is definitely keep things simple. Just say what you mean, and if you're lucky, then you do what you say. But I think that's what procurement should do, is that make things simple. And it's difficult because you're when you're at a procurement conference, it's easy to be like get into the jump on to the sort of bandwagon and talk about all the terms and buzzwords and acronyms and all that. But even there, I think it's important to keep things simple. I would say, whenever you are communicating, whether to procurement or to anyone, is assume that there's someone who has no idea what you're talking about. Speak to that person.
Yeah. And I'll actually add one last thing to what both of you have shared, but more from the listener point of view. This is something that I challenge myself to do. And I think as long as you sound polite, it's an okay thing to say. But I find myself increasingly thinking, and in some cases saying, what do you mean by that? Because I've been in a lot of conversations where all of a sudden you've got somebody slinging around 25-cent words and you're thinking, I have no idea what this person is talking about. Like, I think I'm an informed person. I think I'm educated on the subject matter, but the terminology this person is choosing to use is starting to create a barrier. And rather than sort of feeling in a position where, okay, I no longer should be participating in this conversation, I'm trying to challenge myself to then say, interesting. What do you mean by that? So it's like I get to compliment you for sounding very informed and using all those very big words. But then at the same time, okay, I'm politely signaling I've lost the meaning of what you're saying, but I do want to learn more so the conversation shouldn't end. So it's actually my challenge I'm going to issue to everybody who's either watching us or who's listening in. If you hear these buzzwords that we've joked about today, if you hear these acronyms that we've joked about today thrown around in a conversation, don't hesitate. What do you mean by that? Because it's a good signal that maybe the language has gotten away from what's simple. And it still indicates that you're looking to learn. So Phil and Vishal, this was a really fun episode. I'm glad that I got the chance to do it with both of you. Thank you both for being good sports, honestly, and being a part of the conversation today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kelly. It's always fun to chat with you and Phil as well.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I'm going to run off and register that procurement coach domain as we speak.
Well, you better hurry. There's a burning platform. You got to go ahead and get that done. All right. Thank you both so much. And thank you to everybody who's listening in or watching. We're glad you're with us here on the Love Procurement Podcast.